What's not to love about an Instant Pot? You set it, you put the food in it, you walk away and come back to a complete meal. Safe, convenient, and easy. It feels like ultra modern kitchen technology. But here's something most people don't realize. The science behind it is almost 70 years old. And once you've seen what came before it, you start to realize it's not a new idea at all. At first glance, it doesn't look like anything special. Just a simple aluminum saucepan, the kind of thing you'd expect to see sitting on just about any stove. But the longer you look at it, the more it starts to give itself away. Those little tabs around the rim, they're not decorative. When you pick up the lid and notice the matching slots, it becomes pretty clear that this isn't meant to just sit on top. It's meant to lock into place. And once it does, you realize this isn't just a pot with a lid at all. It's a sealed system. From there, the rest of the design starts to make sense because what looks like a small, almost insignificant plug in the lid turns out to be anything but. It's a fail-safe designed to give way if pressure ever builds beyond what the pot is meant to handle, quietly preventing something much more dramatic from happening. Underneath the lid, there's a sealing ring, and in many ways, that's the entire ballgame, because without a tight seal, pressure can't build, and without pressure, you're right back where you started, holding nothing more than an ordinary saucepan. But seal the lid, introduce heat, and everything changes. Now, if you're tempted to think this is something from another era, something your grandmother might have used and we've since moved past, it doesn't take long to realize that's not really the case. Because sitting right next to it is a stainless steel version that works perfectly well on a modern induction cooktop, which tells you something important. The system didn't disappear, it evolved. And one of the clearest places that you can see that evolution is in the sealing ring itself, because over the decades, that one component has been redesigned again and again for the simple reason that everything depends on getting that seal right. The early rings were made from natural rubber, which worked well enough at the time but didn't age particularly gracefully. Heat, time, and repeated use would eventually cause them to dry out, crack, and lose their ability to seal. And when that happened, that's where many of the horror stories people still associate with pressure cookers actually began. Modern versions, on the other hand, use silicone, which is far more stable under heat, far less prone to deterioration, and ultimately much more reliable over time. While the materials have improved, the underlying idea hasn't changed at all. And in fact, for most of these cookers, replacement seals are still readily available. You just need the make and model, and in most cases, a quick internet search is all it takes to bring one back to life. Up at the top of the pot, the system becomes a little more interactive because this is where you start to take control. There's a base weight that's always present, setting the minimum temperature. But when a recipe calls for more, additional rings can be added, stacking into place and increasing the overall weight, which in turn raises the pressure inside the pot. It's a remarkably simple mechanism, but it's also a precise one, because at this point you're not just cooking, you're controlling the environment inside the vessel. Before that system fully closes, though, there's one more step, and it's an important one. As the pot heats up, you'll see a steady column of steam begin to form, and that's what you're waiting for, because inside the pot, you don't want a mixture of air and steam. You want pure steam, and this venting process is what clears the air out and makes that possible. Only once that's happening does it make sense to place the regulator on top, and that's one of those small moments where a bit of experience shows. I tend to use a fork simply to keep my hands clear of the steam. Once the weight is in place, the system begins to build pressure, but even then, it doesn't happen all at once. If you watch closely, especially on the older aluminum pot, you can actually see the transition as small breaks in the steam column reveal the last pockets of air working their way out. The system essentially clearing itself in preparation for what comes next. And then, almost subtly at first, the regulator begins to move. That movement is the signal. the point at which the pot has reached pressure and is now regulating itself, releasing just enough steam to maintain a balance. On some cookers, that regulation shows up as an occasional, gentle release. On others, especially with a simple load like water, it can be more active, with the regulator moving more frequently as the steam responds to even small changes in heat. Either way, the principle is the same, and that becomes especially clear when you adjust the heat and watch the response. Because as you bring the temperature down, the motion slows and the system settles into its own rhythm, somewhere between completely still and constantly active. And then, returning to the earlier pot, you can see the same idea expressed in a simpler form. Here, the regulator is a single piece with a plastic knob, light enough to place by hand with no adjustments to make. Just set it in place and let it do its job. The motion is a little different, a little less dramatic perhaps, but just as constant, just as steady, and ultimately just as effective. So when you look at an Instant Pot, you're really not looking at a new invention. You're looking at a refinement of something that's been around for a very long time. The materials got better, the controls got easier, and the experience got a whole lot more automatic. But these older cookers, they still work. They just ask a little bit more of you.